disruption to that end.
Okay, and my second question is about COVID, because yesterday, a lot of what we heard from the doctors, they've been saying since the end of March. Back then, the projections were that 100,000 Americans would die. Now, as you know, we've surpassed that by 2.5 times. Did the administration fail to communicate how serious this threat was to the American people? Or how else do you explain what went wrong?
Look, I would say the initial projection that our doctors gave us was 2 million people that would lose their lives. And it's a tragedy anytime one life is lost. But we are far below the 2 million that this could have been. We took very aggressive measures at the beginning of this with the China travel ban, creating the greatest testing system in the entire world. Therapeutics, the fact that we have 6 working therapeutics right now. The fact that we continue to identify more and more. The fact that I believe we have a chart on this, a fatality chart. It's deaths by 100 for age and month. And as you can see, deaths have come down for every age group. And for those over 70, that line, that red line, is a testament to what this president has done. Therapeutics, monoclonal antibodies, that is a recent one, that reduces hospitalization in high-risk seniors with moderate to mild COVID by 70%. That's American ingenuity rising to the occasion, and President Trump oversaw all of this. But, of course, we are seeing cases rise, and it's very important. Wash your hands, socially distance. We're taking this seriously.
I think the mixed messaging contributed to that, because just this week, for example, yesterday, Vice President Pence wanted to make clear that they supported state and local decision-making. Just 2 days ago, you called some of those state guidelines Orwellian. So how do you expect people to know what to do with all this mixed messaging?
Well, 2 things can happen at once, and it's this: taking COVID seriously, engaging in aggressive mitigation, but also recognizing that the American people have certain freedoms. And it is, by definition, Orwellian for a state like Oregon to say, if you have more than 6 people in your family congregate in your home, we can jail you for 30 days. That's not the American way. The American people know the CDC recommendations, know the guidelines. We've been talking about this for 10 months, but the American people still have certain freedoms, still have autonomy, and still can make important self-responsibility decisions themselves.
Yes, Deborah.
So it's a very interesting, because she actually let me actually touch the COVID related question, because it's the first time to ever actually hear anything straight out of her mouth about the COVID this time. This Asian American journalist just actually briefly touched upon, there had been a massive amount of people who are actually dead, well surpassing the expectation that was already projected earlier in March. What was around like 100,000. We're actually, having almost like a 2.5 times a greater amount of death toll. If this type of number is really pressing, then you should actually recognize a serious failure. If so, if this current regime recognizes, any botched up efforts to contain the COVID-19, if so, what went wrong and what was really the harshest bungle up that eventually induced this massive fiasco? That's really the question. But, Caitlyn, not really Caitlyn, Mrs. McEnany completely denies any blunder caused by this government. Because she says that the doctors in the first place projected the total amount of death would be around 2 million. So we're actually far below that level. We now actually have, almost like a 250,000, right? Almost like 250,000 Americans who were all dead because of the COVID-19. Because, the Trump administration exercises the greatest and probably the most well-organized testing system that could ever be recorded on Earth. So far, there are 6 therapeutics out there, and the scale and the scope of the testing center would be so surpassing and outsmarting other rivals across the nation, across the globe. If you ever actually look deeper into this fatality chart, it's really a ratio. Out of 100 different cases, how many people would actually die? If there are 100 different COVID-infected people, then how many people would die? the actual death rates would go down significantly according to this chart, not mine. So this is really kind of all the hard work, that would actually, completely put a cap on the amount of a death toll that might be caused directly from or by the COVID-19 up to 70 percentile. That's really hard work. Excessive, intensive interest pivoted by President Donald Trump to look hard and deeper on the antibiotic treatment and the therapeutic recognition and a monoclonal therapeutic treatment in relation to the antibodies cultivation. Then these type of science-oriented intensification was really the cause that we are actually witnessing the very progress, although there are indeed, a mass outburst of the infections. That's really the reason we are actually seeing greater number of people dying. The sole cause of the 250,000 death toll is really the actual burgeoning number of the cases. As long as we can actually contain the virus, then this is not a great deal, because we've been actually following the rules in concert with the science, hard science, because the testing center, the very functioning efficiency of the test center definitely outsmarts and outfoxes any other in this universe. If you ever actually make comparison with Germany or South Korea, you would actually notice that's her opinion, not mine. And there are 6 therapeutics out there. And if you ever actually wanted to cite, doctors of prognosis or prognostication, you'd actually notice that they've already actually, projected number 2 million instead of, 100,000, as you like to say. She was talking to this Asian American journalist. So, what? The administration refuses to recognize its own mistake. Simply, the gravity should actually be overlooked because there has been a certain intensification, especially intensified and emphasized and accentuated and amplified and negatively from the mainstream media skewed to and at Joe Biden. Because this is more like the liberal-leaning agenda that might be pivoted by Democrats. That's really the reason. She didn't actually say that, but it would be palpable because there was no recognition. And one another question was, there are sort of mixed messages because the White House and the press secretary McEnany said, all different suppressive efforts coming from different states are no less than Orwellian. That means, these are really depressively controlling, as if you might actually witness from the George Orwell's novel like 1984, the government, the big government, and the deep state would be engaged with every turn of the human life. So simply, that type of controlling mechanism would be so there in the midst of the COVID-19. Because, the COVID-19 is almost a great reason and excuse to revive the spirit of Orwellian government, the deep state, whose, deep tentacles would reach out to every individual with an eye to suppressing their individual freedom. That was how she actually portrayed, many of independent acts coming from state and local governments. But now, if you ever actually listen to Mike Pence, the current vice president, who just actually said that earlier, in the wake of growing COVID-19 deaths, maybe, state governments would actively take action in order to prevent the further deaths that would be acceptable, and that would not be that much harmful or nefarious. So, Mike Pence somehow reflected certain leniency on the local government's independent controlling method. Because before that, the Donald Trump administration was so hostile that they would actually, and then any officials from the Trump administration completely demonized any type of a state level controls or measures or even countermeasures or action or inaction or whatever that might be. Because they thought that these would encroach upon the personal freedom, or this would be a top-down control designed to suppress individual freedom or significantly constrain or restrain civil rights. That was really the official excuse. Maybe that was just a subterfuge, a skin-deep subterfuge. They had ulterior motives to actually, politicize this agenda in order to enrich their political capital by consolidating those Tea Party movement followers or birther movement followers or anti-government sentiments. Is it true? I don't really know, but I know So this reporter's question is, there are so many mixed messages. Then how do we, if you're an individual and if you're really a local government officials, how would you actually know which one to follow? What is really right? If there is no definitive guideline coming from the federal government, and if there is any diversified, somewhat mixed, confusing messages coming from the same White House within a couple of days, then how would he actually know that? Think about it. What are you going to do about this incoherent dissonance and cacophony happening in your White House? In your president's White House? That's really the message. She says that different states can definitely act in a different way. There is a certain wiggle room allowed to different states, especially if there are varying conditions affecting negatively affecting certain states negatively. That's really the case. But she still actually draws the line from very expensive efforts coming from state like Oregon. For instance, if there is any type of person in your house above this age of seniority, right? Like per se, 60 and 70, and you somehow actually decide to be in touch with that person, or if you ever actually gather together with that person, you could even actually face a jail time up to 30 days, or there could be punishment or penalties by actually violating very detailed rules imposed on each individual in an effort to oppress the transmission of the COVID-19, the coronavirus per se, right? That's what has been said. She still actually believes that this type of hardcore efforts coming from the local governments are really against the personal freedom, so it would be still characterized as Orwellian dictatorship, Orwellian rule, and for sure, this is really definitely this definitely leaves a certain bad flavor in one's mouth. If you are a really believer of individual freedom, that's what she wants to say. But still, we are actually dealing with a very harsh truth that there are a growing number of people affected or infected with the COVID-19, affected by the COVID-19, or infected with the coronavirus. That's really the reason there should be much aggressive efforts. And what the actual message is very simple. There should be, very aggressive efforts to crack down on and clamp down on the COVID expansion. It's true. I know everyone should actually rely on a hard science by taking medicine or being tested if there was any type of symptoms. And there should be, very, very intensified and industrious efforts to curb the communication and transmission of the COVID-19. There should be one. Definitely, for sure. She definitely acknowledges the importance and significance of hard work in order to minimize the number of people who who would have tested positive for COVID-19. That's a true. But again, she never actually, hints at the failure conducted by the government. That would be the main cause why we are witnessing this whopping amount of death. That's not what she has done. She refused to acknowledge, or she refused to give a nod to the fiasco, the mega-sized colossal fiasco conducted by Donald Trump administration, especially at the initial phase. You know what? This young reporter mentions, what's that? The very projection made by doctors across the nation early on in March, when there was initial outbreak and a surge in the COVID-19 case. There was a first wave, right, taking place at the time. And doctors really actually, if there is any type of, hard work or, appropriate, timely endeavors coming from the federal government to turn the tide around, then this could actually be reduced into 100,000 or plus. That was really the original projection. And this was actually, advertised by Donald Trump. Yeah. Somehow the minimized number of death toll was really the prognostication that you really like to believe. Those officials are related to the White House task force, including President Donald Trump. But these were really the numbers, given by the doctors. But in a way, we are actually definitely well beyond that threshold. This high bar was overcome, really, by 2.5 times. 2.5 more deaths. These are real numbers that truly took place and transpired. It's true. But again, the press secretary refuses to, or simply rejects to realize how serious the failure caused by the administration is. And was, especially early on. Even only if there was an initial response to the COVID-19 in a better sense, then it would have been much better for the United States. But but she actually still holds on to the very quick response conducted by or practiced by Donald Trump, saying that the United States was at the forefront of practicing the China travel ban in light of the COVID-19. In the wake of COVID-19, it's not really in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. So that was really early enough. We should actually recognize that. We should actually crown President Donald Trump with a recognition and approval because, his insight was great enough to ban any type of, travelers coming from China. That was really great enough. And that there was, sufficient efforts to set up, testing centers across the nation. And the whole scope and optic of the testing centers and the testing were really great to overwhelm the entire nation with the sufficient resources. That's what she said. She was living in a different country. It's a very, very interesting because there were sex therapeutics that were already set up, and these were all maintained because of the very devotion to the COVID-19 management. And the President Donald Trump is very cooperative with the doctors to gain information from them, although it was a really proven fact that President Donald Trump was not all present, at least for the past 5 months, when there was a serious discussion on the management and the preventive measures or whereabouts. These debates were taking place, he was gone forever and more. And then the next question was really great. When there is no unified voice inside the White House, just within the days, there are two very, polemic and divided opinions coming from the key officials, very heading figures inside the White House. How would anyone know what to follow? Because, the White House press secretary just yesterday said this type of, suppressive measures taken by the local governments at a local level would be so suppressive that would be a reminiscent and truly a reminiscent of Orwellian governing, right? Then, Mike Pence, completely shocked to actually witness this type of surging numbers, shifted from his status quo position. He somehow made a detour to say that, probably it's time for giving a more wiggle room to state governments. The local entities can definitely plan ahead because there are varying conditions existing from state to state. So, one state can actually be more aggressive. The other can actually, downsize and right-size the significance of the management or controlling. Anything is possible. That's what has been said. There is a certain type of a breakaway from the very current position so far maintained. The previous position, but she still actually says that, certain states like Oregon, who actually, would go further distance, even actually to punish, to at least to be able to punish a certain person who might actually, constantly contact the elderly, family members or well over 60s and the 70s in order to increase the possibility of a virus transmission. Then, this individual could have faced, jail time up to 30 days behind bars. That would be possible. And this type of intrusive infringement on personal freedom would be so Orwellian. That's the way she still holds on to. She still clings to her previous view. But, the thing is, as the whole nation is witnessing almost indomitable growth of deaths. So maybe, state authorities can actually think about taking their own steps further, depending upon and contingent upon and hinging upon their own circumstances. That would be possible. But again, the basic fundamentals can boil down to simple messages. We all should be very aggressive. We should never actually be passive, but aggressive about this management of the COVID-19 and the control of the virus transmission. And the people should actually be in the know and should stay in touch with the virus update by constantly resorting to doctors and nurses and science. That's what it is about. But President Donald Trump is not really anti-science mob who's been completely denying what's been proven empirically or medically. He's been actually, in contrast to rumors or the depictions portrayed by the mainstream, he's been at the vanguard of installing more test centers, and he was really quick enough to put a ban on traveling or incoming from China. That was very critical to the early suppression, allegedly. But indeed, it was just actually unilateral prohibition, which was not really that helpful. That was actually a viewpoint from different journals, not me. But but she says that it was a very insightful early action taken by President Donald Trump again. And if you ever actually noticed that she just really wants to give a credit to Donald Trump for setting up very intensified and strengthened test centers across the nation to give a greater chances of being tested by any person who might actually struggle with the symptoms or non-symptomatic conditions, because of but these individuals could actually encounter any individuals who later tested positive for COVID-19. Any type of conditions were accepted to be tested because of this such an double down efforts by President Donald Trump to launch an aggressive testing throughout the nation, almost indiscriminatorily. That was the very feat accomplished by Donald Trump. She said that, not me. And there were indeed scientific researches that were actually part of this enormous progress on lowering down the number of deaths, because there has been a monoculous and an antibody research and a 6 therapeutics. These are all part of the medical advance, which played a significant role to lower down the number of deaths. Because when she actually pulled out a chart illustrating the death rates per 100 COVID infected patients, and this chart depicts a significant drop in the number of deaths per 100 patients. That's a very interesting. She just actually simply blames the greater amount of people who are being affected by the COVID-19 for the recent surge in deaths. The more we have the COVID-19 virus people, the more we actually witness the exponential growth of deaths. That was really the reason. Again, we need to actually resort to hard science to be very aggressive in terms of fighting off and fending off the COVID virus. That's what it is about. But what can we say? Because of the contact, we just actually witness such an uptick in the number of the people who are just simply exposed to COVID-19. They were just actually being affected by it. They were just being infected with it. They were just simply touched by the COVID-19. Those, what can we say? That's a very interesting. Was there anything that I actually didn't mention? And if you ever actually analyze that chart, she just actually pinpoints the very key points that might actually be notable, because across all different age groups and genders, there are a significant plummet in the number of deaths. The total death rates across all population demographic groups were simply abated and lowered down because of the hard endeavor in scientific research and medical adjustment. Simply setting up more of a flagship testing centers across the nation, which was the very plan set out by President Donald Trump, because he was really the mastermind who literally envisioned all different early action ahead of time. But right now, it's really up to the grassroots level governments or state governments to plan ahead as more and more cases are penetrating into the local regions. So there were sure to be greater efforts to disseminate more preventive measures and medical gear to fight off the virus transmission and communication. This is communicable that we need to actually be very belligerent. And belligerent, that means you need to actually work industriously and diligently to fight off the expansion of the virus. Otherwise, it would actually go crazy. All the raging expansion of the cases, which is nothing less than an explosion. Explosion. That means every corner of our society should scramble their main power and resources to confine this communication to its minimum. That's very important. This requires efforts from all different corners of the society. It takes a total village. It takes a whole village, not just simply to raise a child, but truly to contain the ever-growing size and the scope of a virus. That's what it is about.